Hi and welcome, it's Jennifer McGuire. I hope your week is off to a good start. Today I'm sharing how to add dimensional details to your projects using Nuvo Dots. Now there are other products in the market that are similar and those would work for these techniques too. I'm just having a lot of success with the Nuvo Dots, so I thought I would share that with you here today. So I actually have 3 card examples for you showing different ways to use them. But first let's take a look at the product itself. These are the TONIC Nuvo Drops. Now these come in a few different finishes, and the most common one is the crystal drop, which has a gloss finish to it. This comes in a bunch of different colors, and when this dries, it looks like enamel dots. There's also the glitter finish, which has lots of nice glitter in it in a variety of colors. Then there's a metallic or pearlescent finish too. And finally, my personal favorite, which are the jewel drops, and these are transparent. So they dry clear with a tint of color to them, and I use these quite a bit. Now all of these come in these great bottles with these fun little caps on top, and I put a drop of whatever's inside on top of the cap and let it dry so I can quickly figure out what color is inside. Now I've never had any problems with these clogging, but if you do, you can just use a sharp needle to clear that. Now, since there are so many colors available, I did want to mention that there are a few that I recommend to start with. First, we have the Morning Dew, which is the clear or completely transparent product. It comes in this large bottle or a smaller one. Then I really like the White Gloss and the Ebony Black for adding details, and we'll use those a lot today. And also the White Blizzard, which is kind of a clear glitter. So those are some that I really like to use. Now I found some tips that I find are helpful when using this product. So I'm just going to take one of the crystal gloss here, and what I do is I first squirt a little bit out to the side just to make sure there's no air bubbles. Then when you're creating a round drop of this, you just want to go have the bottle completely straight up, and you put a little drop on the paper and then slowly pull up and away until the product releases from the tip of the bottle, and then you know you'll end up with a great result. I really like that these form into nice, round, perfect drops. So the first one I did was the crystal drop with the gloss finish. Below that we have glitter. Here we have the metallic or pearl finish. And here we have the jewel drops with the tint of color. I'm going to show you a closer look at these in a moment. Now when I'm putting these down, I find best to create dots. If you smear this out a bit, you will probably end up with some cracking. But more about cracking in a moment. I wanted to show you the samples of the colors. Now I made a bunch of dots like this and they all turned out beautiful. I did want to mention that after you let it dry, you want to let it dry overnight to be sure. If you put something heavy on it, it will flatten a tiny bit. So they may flatten a little bit in the mail, but nothing that I think is any problem. I've in fact sent myself samples of this in the mail and they all looked good in the end. Now here we have the Nuvo Crystal Drops. These are all the colors the drops are available in. So you can hit pause if you want to see any of these. These are the gloss finish crystal drops. So you can see the black and the white there on the bottom, along with all the pretty colors they come in. And I'll use some of these in the video here today. Now the jewel drops are the ones that I use the most, but they don't come in as many colors. You can see them here. They're clear with just a tint of color, and they are beautiful in real life. Great for subtle accents on your cards. Now next we have the metallic or the pearl looking drops. Now these come in more colors, and you can see you get this beautiful kind of swirly looking metallic drop using these. And by the way, if you want to create your own little swatches like this, I have a free download over on my blog, and I'll link to that here. Now finally we have the glitter drops. So this is what these look like when you add drops to your projects. They're like little domes filled with glitter, and I like that white blizzard there on the bottom the most. It's hard to see there, but we'll use it in today's video. Now I do believe that TONIC has come out with glow-in-the-dark drops, but I don't have those quite yet. Now before we get into the techniques, I do want to talk about the cracking that some people have had occur. Now I contacted TONIC and they gave me the best statement about how to avoid cracking, and also some changes they made to their jewel drops to prevent cracking. So I highly recommend checking it out. I'll put it in my YouTube description below so you can read their response. And you can also go to my blog if you want to read it. I found it a great response and with very helpful tips. But the big key is you don't want to make your drop super big, like no bigger than a 1/2 inch. and you want to let it dry completely. I recommend doing so overnight. Okay, so now that we went through the basics of this, let's go ahead and dive into these different cards that I want to show you today. Now on all of the cards, I used the new Ink Blot Shop Flopsy Bird stamp set. This stamp set is so much fun. And then I also used the Tiny Bubbles stamp set on a couple of them. And I'll show you some others I used throughout the video. Now I went ahead and stamped a bunch of images from those two sets onto Nina White cardstock with Hero Arts Black Intense ink, and then I did some coloring with Copic markers. I then cut them all out and I'm ready to add them to my card. Now to save some time, I'm going to skip showing the stamping and coloring since I'm not that great with coloring anyways, and instead we're going to focus on adding the details with the TONIC Nuvo Drops. Okay, so I have a full sticky note, post-it note here. So the entire back of this has stick to it. So I'm holding it upside down and putting my little flamingos right onto the sticky part. This will help hold them in place as we add our dimensional details. Now I'm using my anti-static powder tool to kind of brush over that so that it's not all sticky now. That way my fingers won't stick to it and mess up whatever we add. I find this to be a very helpful trick when adding these little details. So I'm starting with Nuvo Drops. Now remember, these are the ones that are clear with a tint of color, and this one has a tint of pink to it. So I'm going to add a little bit right onto his little beak here, and then I'm also going to add some lines of it to the wings themselves. So you can add little drops, you can add little lines, anything that's small. If you get into larger areas, you do have to worry about cracking. It may not crack right away, but going through the mail, it might crack if you spread out a lot of this. So I'm just going to do little lines here, and you can see it adds a lot of fun dimensional detail to this. Now, if you don't have the TONIC Nuvo Drops, you can do this with other products that are similar. There are many on the market. I just tested a bunch of them and I found that these held up best when they went through the mail. So that's why I chose to focus on them today. Now, if you want to, you can use a fine tip pen or needle to kind of stretch the little drops that you create or the lines you create to make them nice and fine at the tip, or to kind of move them wherever you want. And there you can see the beautiful detail that adds. Now, this is the big one. I do this to all critters that I create. I use the ebony black. Now this stuff is tough because if you get it somewhere you don't want it, it's there and it's black. So I always test it off on scrap paper first. The best way to make a tiny dot is to squirt a little bit out of the tip and touch that drop to the paper. Just touch it barely. I find that's a great way to make a tiny dot. Another great way is to squirt some out on scrap paper and then use a pin and dip the pin into the drops and then touch that to your project. That way you can start with a tiny little dot and add more if you want to. And you can really control where it ends up. And that's what I did for these flamingo eyes here. That makes a huge difference in making that critter stand out, make those eyes nice and black and dimensional. Okay, so now do you see around that window frame, there are tiny little white dots. I wanted to show you how I created that. This is the Memory Box pinpoint frame, and it creates tiny little dots around the window and inside the window. But I'm just going to use the negative piece here. Now I'm using the white Nuvo crystal drops to create tiny little dots, and I'm putting them right on top of the little pinpoints that die made. So I'm just using those dots that the die made as a guide to put these tiny little white dots. Now something like this takes a little bit of time. It took me about 5 minutes to do all of these. You kind of get in a fast rhythm as you go, but I think it makes a big difference on a simple card. Now when I'm doing this, I'm actually have a little drop kind of squished out at the tip, and I'm touching the drop to the paper, not the tip itself. And that gives me those tiny little white dots. That pinpoint frame die is so much fun, and it's a great guide for making these little dots. Next, I wanted to show you how I created that heart that you see up there on the top. This is easy to do with the Nuvo Drops. There are a couple ways to do it, but I tested a bunch, and the way that I found gave the best results is to do 2 upside down drops. You see one there and one that connects it. So these are like upside down raindrops. Just make sure you don't start too close together or they will turn into a blob. And you might look kind of thin at first, but it'll settle and give a beautiful heart. So just practice a few times, creating upside down raindrops. Here's one. that comes from the side and goes down to the bottom, and then another over next to that. Don't start too close when you do the second drop, or it'll look kind of like a blob when you're done. Let it kind of spread on its own and turn into a perfect heart. Now I made my heart a little too short, so I'm going to use a pin to kind of drag the tip down a bit, and there we have the perfect heart. So I let these dry overnight. I just want to be safe and make sure that they give me great results and hold up in the end, so I let them dry overnight. I did create a white note card, and I traced the window opening of our little frame that we created onto the front of the white note card. This shows me where to stamp the rest of my flamingos since I cut their legs off. So I'm stamping them right onto my white note card here, and this will peek through the front of our frame. So now after I made sure that was completely dry, I'm just going to go ahead and erase the lines we did, and I can add the window back on top. So I'm going to use foam tape to add this on. I want to be generous with the foam tape so that it holds up nicely when it goes through the mail, and I'll add that to the front of the card. Now since I'm adding the little flamingo bodies on with foam tape, I want to make sure it doesn't look funny if you peek from the side. So what I like to do is color the base bird with a little bit of color around the edges, then add foam dots, and then put our cutout flamingos on top. That way if you peek from the side you see a little bit of pink, not white instead. A little detail like that takes a little bit of time, but it makes a big difference in the end. I then used a little piece of tape to add my little speech bubble, and we've got a finished card. I did stamp this thank you sentiment on the front and glued it right over his legs, and created my own sentiment to go on the inside of the card too. These images are from the ink blot shop Kindness and Thanks stamp set. This stamp set is fantastic because it has many sentiments that you can build to create whatever you want to say. And there you can see all the details we added with the Nuvo Drops. We have the dots around the frames, the little details on the flamingos themselves, and that dimensional heart. I'm telling you, I think those little flamingos are the cutest things going. Okay, now for a second example with some more ways to use those Nuvo Drops. This time I'm going to use some of the glitter ones because I really like the clear glitter so much. I again stamped some flopsy birds, colored them in, and I have them on a sticky note just to hold them while I add these details. This is the White Blizzard glitter. Now this is pretty much clear, but it has some sparkly kind of iridescent glitter inside that really picks up whatever color you put it on top of. So I'm putting little dots kind of towards the bottom of the bird's belly, and then making smaller dots as I go up towards his neck so they kind of fade out. Now I will say the glitter ones are definitely the easiest to work with because they are easier to control because of the glitter inside. I also decided to add little smiley faces to these birds. I like that these birds are simple so you can change their expressions, or you can add details like we're adding here. You can also add party hats to them or bows or anything else. I just went with the birds and added my own details. So after I added some of the glitter drops, I'm going back to that ebony black crystal drop to add some dimension and dark color to their eyes. And I used the tip of my pin to do that again. Now the reason I use the pen most of the time is because that way I can be sure that I don't squirt out too much. I'm starting with a little and I can add more as much as I want. For this card, I'm using the Memory Box Pinpoint Circle Frame. This gives me 2 rows of dots going around the cutting edge and inside. Now I'm going to put this together just like we did the flamingo. I traced the window onto the front of a card, stamped the same image there, added the frame piece to the front of the card with some foam adhesive, and now I can add my pieces that go in front of the window. To save some time, I'm kind of speeding through this since it's a lot like the last card. I did create those little tiny white drops around the frame using the white Nuvo Drops once again. You can see they're not perfect drops, but it still is fun. I think the imperfection in the size of the drops really adds to the playful nature of this card. I also added the little birds right there in the center and a heart, and I covered the heart with that clear glitter Nuvo Drops, and it really picks up the color of the red underneath. That's a great staple to have in your collection. Now the banner with the sentiment is from that same Kindness and Thanks ink blot shop stamp set that I used earlier. So I did congratulations on that banner and cut it out and added it to the front of the window. So on this second example, I showed you how you can use the glitter Nuvo Drops to really add a lot of fun to your project, especially the clear that picks up the color of whatever is underneath, and also how you can use tiny little dots to enhance a stamped image. Finally, I wanted to mention that I did go back with some of the ebony black drops in a pin and created little eyelashes for the girl bird. So sometimes the tiniest little details are fun to add. And next we have our final example. This one has a little party scene of birds kind of sitting out in the middle of the card. On this one I'm going to show you some more fun ways to add Nuvo drop details. So on this one I went ahead and stamped and colored a bunch of images onto this white cardstock panel. And I'm going to add tiny little drops onto the birds, just like we did in the last example, but this time I'm using the crystal drops that have the gloss finish. So I'm doing a color that kind of matches the birds. Here on the red, I'm putting like a pink color Nuvo drop. And again, I'm starting with bigger drops towards the bottom and then allowing them to kind of fade as I go up towards the neck. If you wanted to make super tiny dots, you can use little pins. Or if you messed up one of your drops and didn't make it quite the right size, you can use your pin to kind of form it to what you want it to look like. And by the way, you can use the pin head too if you want to make bigger drops. Now on the leaves, I put a line of the woodland green gloss finish Nuvo Drops right down the center of the leaves, and that adds some dimension to them too. And I added the ebony black eyes to each of the birds. So I went ahead and did this with all of the birds, added a smile too, and then it's time to create some balloons to add to the birds' beaks and to their little wings. So I'm just taking a gloss Nuvo drop and making a large drop. I could go larger if I want to, and actually I wish I kind of would. My balloons are a little bit small, but that's okay. I have little pencil circles where I was kind of planning on having the balloons. So I'm putting the drops down in 3 different colors, and then I let that sucker dry overnight. You want to make sure this dries a long time before you move on to the next step. Now, if you want to also make sure that your big drops kind of settle a little bit, you can tap them from the bottom, but I find that that is really not necessary with the Nuvo drops. I find that they form perfectly on their own if you just let them sit and dry. So the next day, I came back once this was all dry, and I used a ruler to draw a little black string to connect to the beak and the wings of the birds, and then a little string ends that I drew with the black pen also. And then I went back with the matching Nuvo drops and used my pin to pick up a little bit to make the little knot at the base of the balloons to make them even more realistic. And the greatest thing about these drops is they form perfectly round and have great dimension and shine, so they look like realistic balloons. Now the Celebrate sentiment is also from that Kindness and Thanks ink blot shop stamp set that I showed you earlier. So you can see the 3 different cards I made with all the same stamps, but I kind of changed up the techniques that I did with the Nuvo drops on each. So I hope this inspires you to add dimensional details to your projects using whatever product you may have. It's great for having fun on simple stamped images. If you're interested in the supplies I use, I always link them below in my YouTube description, but I'll have much more information, including that free ink swatch chart over on my blog. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll come back soon, and see you then.